Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the two-man game here on Claibs Online. I'm Bob Ramsey. That is my partner, Matt Rocchio, as we discuss basketball at several different levels. And primarily, we focus on St. Louis University because I'm here. And then Rocc takes over with the NBA. We're going to have a special guest in a little bit, Mike Claiborne, who has been making a run through the NBA here in person lately. And Claibs and Rocc will throw around the NBA rock, as it were. So let's jump right into SLU basketball, Matt, and talk about this challenge / opportunity for the Billikens in non-conference play to take on, depending on what ranking you prefer, somewhere in the low teens, somewhere between 10 and 14 is ranked Auburn. Auburn comes to St. Louis University on Saturday.
I just go with whatever the highest ranking is. We'll use that from here on out, especially if they win.
Yeah, especially. Actually, that sort of is my rule of thumb. I think it's Ken Palm. It may be somebody else. Somebody had him at 10. And,
okay.
And that's pretty close. That's about where their resume puts them. Excuse me. So Auburn comes in, and the Billikens had a run. This is the next to last game in that non-conference run I've been talking about for 6 weeks of strength of schedule games. The Billikens are, 3-3 so far in those games, and they really need, it'd be great to get these last two. Auburn tomorrow, Drake on Wednesday. It'd be great to get them both, because then you've said, wow, we've really established a terrific non-conference resume to get the benefits of that in March. Even if you split these last two, I think it's a representative effort. So let's focus. And that's why we think these games are important. And you're on board with that. Yes.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, if they can make a good showing, they can win a couple here. I mean, already the Boise State game is now falling into the Q1. So when we talk about this team, in their tournament resume, which I know some people will say it's December, but this non-conference schedule is about to finish up. So now you got to start looking at how those non-conference games, both the wins and the losses, are going to be looked at, 2-3 months down the line. Already Boise State's a good win for them. So if they can add another one in here and also just show out and show well, that'll be a big thing for them.
Yeah, I think so too. The big challenge is not that Auburn is good, but the reasons why they're good. They're veterans. They're well coached. They have a 6'9" player who uses his size and is great around the basket, who is also a prolific three-point shooter. They have a 7-footer. And we'll talk about those guys. I want you to focus on those guys for a second and give me your thoughts. And then I want to talk about their guard play, which is, I think, the key to the game. But let's start with the bigs. And I know you've already done some research and some looks at it. When you talk about Martin Linson and you talk about Francis Okoro and Terrence Hargrove Jr. at 6'4", 6'5"-ish, what a defensive challenge for those guys.
Yeah, Jabari Smith Jr. is an absolute monster. We're talking about a guy who, talent-wise, could be the number 1 overall pick in the draft, come around this next year. And I think TJ Hargrove is going to get the primary defensive look, mainly because you can't sacrifice any size in the middle with Walker Kessler, who is their big 7-foot center in the middle. You can't sacrifice any size to try to give up to Jabari Smith. So TJ is going to have another huge game. Obviously, this isn't the same level, this is a different level than what he had to do against BC, but it's also the second game in a row where he's going to be asked to contain arguably the opposing team's best scorer. And that's going to be the big thing right out of the gate, because Jabari Smith, you see 6'10", 220, and you want to say maybe he can bang inside, and he can. But when you see his prolific shooting, Bruce Pearl earlier today, compared him to Kevin Durant, and he couched it and said, he's not that efficient and he's not to that level. But when you talk about 6'10", that size and being able to shoot from outside, that's what the idea you're going to get when you see him. You can't help it. And don't let his shooting, don't let his scoring, just completely draw you in. He also is an incredibly good passer when he's on the floor. 17% assist rate. That's the percentage of times he finishes a possession on the floor with an assist to one of his teammates. So, I mean, that, or when they finish with a basket, I should say, he finishes with the assist. That's one of the highest in the country for a guy who has his kind of usage rate and also is able to be active on the defensive both boards and with steals and blocks. So, I mean, we're talking about an all-around all-star player. There's a reason why I opened this up talking about him as the number one overall player. It's not just scoring. It's not just size. It's, whatever the term is for a 5'2" player in basketball.
Yeah, and obviously, we've seen Imani Bates and we've seen some other guys, but of those kinds of all-round best player, a guy who can do everything, this is the guy. Maybe in the country.
Yeah, I mean, and Slew getting a look at him right now is interesting because he's had a couple down games, but right now he's on a nice little run. I think the big thing to look for him is I'm talking about his passing because it's just you don't see it from a guy of his size usually. When he passes more, he scores more. And he's one of those guys because when he opens up his game and he forces defenders just to take a split second to think about the weak side or the help or, what pass he's going to make. That opens up his game. So right off the bat, you can't only focus on his scoring because if he gets other people involved, that's going to get him rolling. And so we can talk about Terrence Hargrove having a big game defensively, but it's going to have to be everybody, that defense on a string, reacting to what Jabari Smith is doing in a cohesive manner, because if they don't and he's able to get on top of them, then it doesn't matter if he scores 25, the rest of Auburn will get going. And at that point, floodgates can get opened.
I think you just touched on what I think is the number one key. He's going to get his. Mm-hmm. Kessler is going to do certain things, protecting the rim, scoring at the rim. They're going to get theirs. I think the key is stymieing the Auburn guards, who their starting guys are 5'10" and 6 foot. They've got a third guard who's a terrific player. I think the bigs are going to get theirs. And if you focus everything on stopping them, you're going to get destroyed. Because as Rick Majerus said, as Charlie Spoonhour showed with Spoonball going back 25, 30 years ago, basketball is about guards. We all love the bigs who can play. We all love flying up above the rim. Rick Majerus said it's a ground game. And that's what the guards do. And that's who will beat you with Auburn if you don't focus properly.
Yeah, K.D. Johnson and Wendell Green Jr., they're killers out there. And this is, like you said, it's a veteran team. It's a weird combination. It's either a transfer, a guy who's been there for a couple of years, or it's, a phenom freshman in Jabari Smith Jr. But they got transfers all over the court. We've already mentioned two of the three, the third one being Devin Cambridge. The one big thing to note, and I haven't been able to get 100% yes or no on this, but I do not think the big forward Jalen Williams is going to be playing. He missed their past game against North Alabama. That's a big body in there, 6'8", 230. That's the kind of guy who, if they can go, super big with Jabari Smith because of his ability to play on the perimeter at the 3, Jalen Williams at the 4 at 6'8", 230. And then Walker Kessler at 7 feet, that presents a matchup issue, even with a guy like Jordan Nesbitt, who I think will get some time guarding Jabari Smith throughout the game. But even so, that's a matchup problem for Slew potentially. But again, if Jalen Williams doesn't play, now we're talking about potentially lineups or little parts of the game where Slew actually might have a size advantage. And if they could take advantage of that in the little moments, that could be big. And I mentioned that only because the last time they had a big guy who wasn't playing very well in Belmont, they did not take advantage of the minutes where he wasn't in the game. And so that's another big thing. If Jabari Smith's not playing well, if Walker Kessler gets into foul trouble, you have to take advantage of those minutes in those lineups. Because if you don't, you're never going to beat a 13th ranked team in the nation. It's not going to happen. The formula doesn't add up.
Another piece to what you're talking about is we mentioned several of a number of Billiken personnel. The guy we haven't mentioned, and I haven't talked to Travis Ford about how he will use him, and maybe the game will dictate it, Fred Thatch Jr. Fred is a beast defensively and also can be a handful offensively. 6'2", maybe 6'3", but, shoulders of a 6'8" guy, and his defensive prowess is well known. Do you put him on a guard to stymie that guy? Do you put him on Smith for minutes to be physical with him? I think a sidebar thing to watch in this game is when and how successful Fred Thatch is against Auburn.
I like that. And here's the matchup I'll throw out there that you bring up Fred Thatch, and that is the name we mentioned at the end there, Devin Cambridge. He's had a couple big games in a row for Auburn the last few games. He throws down tomahawk dunks. He's able to shoot it a little bit from outside. And they've been big on him going from being like a 6 or 7 point player to a 10 or 12 point player. Mm-hmm. I think Fred Thatch is the exact kind of guy who can get in his kitchen and just completely take him out of a game. And because, he's gotten in his groove. And if you can take him out a little bit, he's still the kind of player who you rattle him just a little bit and you can silence him from the game for the most part. And so right there, I think that's a perfect one for Fred Thatch. And also, just with his size and his ability, it'll be interesting to see if he ever pulls a guy like Jabari Smith, 7 inches, but not much physicality difference between those guys.
So now put on your Auburn hat. Who's guarding, or how are you guarding Jimerson?
I don't have it.
We'll get you one.
I'm hedging his screens hard. I think the BC game was so interesting because it really was so different from what we've seen from SLU as a 3-point shooting team and how their offense ran from the entire season after the first couple games. And so for me, I'm hedging his screens hard, and I'm saying we're going to make sure you have to keep beating us by putting the ball on the floor. I think he was successful, and he was able to beat teams by putting the ball on the floor for a long stretch there. But I think BC was the first team that kind of said, you know what, we're going to take away what you've been doing well this year, go back to what you have been doing. And he was able to do it without much issue and made it work pretty easily. And so I think you hedge his screens hard and you say, if Gibson Jimerson scores 20 points on us, he's got to do it, with tough shots. He's got to get calls in the paint. He's got to have games like he had against Boise State and UAB. We're not letting him have a game like BC where he's flaring off screens all day and taking these quick threes. Just get in his face, bump him hard coming off screens, because lately he's been getting much better at using his screens and finding those angles to run his defenders into him. So, rattle him and get him off that part of his game.
The other thing, I've been watching a trend, and it's been a trend forever, but specifically lately in college basketball. Traditionally, the Billikens don't want you to call a tight game. They want to the Billikens want to beat guys up defensively. I don't think Saturday night against Auburn they want that. The Billikens want it tight because the Billikens want and need to get to the line. That's got to be a key way in which they score points. So I think that's one issue. 2 is, and I think the team has evolved since the Memphis loss a month ago, but the Billiken Bigs have to be able to play their game inside offensively without letting Kessler and Smith get in their head and start altering shots and trying to do crazy stuff to avoid blocks instead of being aggressive, looking to dunk every time, going right at the defender. Those two items are tied together, which is why I saved it. But I think the Billiken Bigs have evolved. We shall see. It's an open question.
Yeah, and one quick note on Walker Kessler, 17.6 block percentage, second in the nation. So when he's on the floor, almost 1/5 of shots that go up in the 2-point range come back down fairly quickly, and not through the net when Walker Kessler's there. So off the bat, it's going to be tricky.
So to reiterate, you got to go right at the guy's chest, and the officials have to call it. 2 things. If they say, well, these are big boys, we got our big boy pants on tonight, you better be able to play through contact. That could be a real challenge for SLU. Not that Okoro and Linson are afraid of contact or can't play physically, but because it will hurt their opportunities at the free throw line, which I think are critical for their offense.
One last thing, and then we're going to make a transition here, bring Mike Claiborne on and talk some NBA. But one last point about this Auburn game. Something we've seen them do in some of these games is use a 1-3-1 zone and full court press. And the big thing is the way it wears teams down. It might not be effective, at the 12-minute mark of the first, but in the 7-minute mark of the second, when the game's close and a turnover can shift things, that's when the press starts to work. So how do you think SLU can do against a 1-3-1 zone, especially with the athletes that Auburn has? And how do you think they'll play against a press, again, with the athletes that Auburn has?
Yeah, I'd like to think, again, that the team has evolved, that Yuri Collins, and maybe that's why you'll see more of the combo, DeAndre Jones and Collins at the same time. And probably you'll end up seeing a little more Jordan Nesbitt handling the ball. You might need to have all three of those guys out there at the same time against pressure.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky. I hope that's not the straw that breaks the camel's back. Auburn is an incredibly good defensive team. We talked about Ken Pom rankings earlier. They're 13th in defense, and it's because they force turnovers like absolute monsters. Let's transition here, talk a little bit of NBA. Mike Claiborne joining us, obviously, the man here at Claibs Online. We bring Mike Claiborne on. Claibs, how you doing today?
Life is good, man. Everything is good. No complaints.
And I apologize. Next week, I'll be sure and wear my Claibs Online Christmas sweatshirt. So I want to be sure that, I haven't forgotten that, and that will appear on the show next week.
Well, I'm honored. Joe Roger came up with that last year, and I have my own that I meant to wear yesterday to a holiday party. I didn't get around to it, so I'm going to give it to my girlfriend, and she can wear it around here.
Yeah, I think
that's good marketing.
And I think along with the marketing comment, Rocc, is I think it's the next step for Claibs gear.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have a spring line of items, caps, polo shirts, you name it, man.
Oh,
even something for the ladies.
How about that? I will be very interested to see what you think about that and what your creative mind comes up with.
Sometimes they call it demented, but if you like creative, I'll go with that word.
I like that a lot. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to let you guys talk NBA. And don't forget, for Billiken fans who are watching us on Claibs Online, it's an 8 o'clock tip tomorrow.
Not an 8 o'clock tip tomorrow night.
TV. CBS Sports Network.
Only game in town tomorrow night. I'm sure we're going to have a big crowd, maybe a sellout, I would think. Everybody I know in town says they're going.
We need it. We being the Billikens, we really need that. We haven't been close to a sellout yet. So even if we get close, I think everybody will be happy.
It's going to be fun tomorrow.
Absolutely.
All right, NBA talk next on Two Man Game.
There it is. Thank you, Rammer. You have a good one.
Our boys.
There it is. That is Bob Ramsey. And again, tomorrow, just a little quick heads up. If you are going to the game, SLU starting the vaccine protocol at the game. So make sure you're all, you're up to date on the protocol, so you know what you're doing. You're walking in there. And again, sell out, buy your tickets. I think they have tickets going for as low as $20 right now. So show out. It's going to be a great game against Auburn. Let's talk a little bit about the NBA. Claibs, you're coming off your big NBA swing. I know you got to see the Mavericks. You got to see the Lakers. Obviously, a lot of Warriors, Pacers, Thunder. What any teams in there that I missed in your run?
Knicks.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Knicks.
I was thinking more about the Warriors in that game.
Yeah, everybody else was too. I'll tell you something. All of those teams have something you like, and then it's something you say, this is not good. And I'll start with Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Luka has to get in shape, man. There's no corners on this guy. Okay, I think his conditioning is terrible. And I think that he's going to have to get that figured out here fairly soon. I think we're starting to hear more about his relationship with Rick Carlisle, and I don't think it's a coincidence that now Sabonis, who's playing for Carlisle in Indianapolis, says he wants out.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I think we know what the common denominator is here. And while I think Rick Carlisle is an interesting coach, I don't think he ever was able to relate to guys going all the way back to Rajon Rondo. And now we're seeing this pattern. And this is his first year in Indiana, and he's got guys wanting out. So that was the first thing I noticed about Dallas. Lakers or team is still trying to figure it out. I know there's a lot of talk now about them moving Russell Westbrook. But the problem is at $40+ million, you got to find the right matchup contract-wise in order for that to happen. I think Russ can still make a contribution. The problem is he's got to have the ball to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And, some teams, just can't work that way. But he's got to have it in his hands most of the time in order to be effective. So that's the one situation I see there. I still think this is a team in the second half that'll figure it out. I think they're going to make a deal. I think they like to have just a little bit more firepower, on the perimeter. But I think they're still a work in progress.
Well, one quick question about the Lakers while we're talking about that, because this has been a big thing lately, which is, and being right there and being able to watch it, I think that comes through better than over the TV. Can you talk about what are you seeing from Anthony Davis? And have you ever seen a guy with the ability to dominate a basketball game be so consistently passive?
You know what, Matt? That's a great question. It's almost like, and I think we've all seen an athlete. He was on the team because of his size, really didn't want to play, but you're big, so you got to play. And I think in his case, while it doesn't seem like the motivation, the fire would be there for a person who's that talented. I think a lot of people feel the way you do. You look at him and you look at Kevin Durant, kind of the same size as far as height is concerned. Davis is a little heavier. Both of them have good handles, but Davis isn't a beast. He's just not. He's not a guy that puts people away. He's got all the tools. I mean, he can shoot, he can handle, he can post up, he can rebound, and he can guard. But he just doesn't have it as consistently. And then the other thing to knock on him is, to call him fragile would probably be unfair. But, there's always a night where he's, you can't expect him in a lineup. He's not a back-to-back night guy. He's looking for rest already, and we're not even we just passed the quarter pole. So there are little things like that I think frustrate basketball fans and I'm sure coaches, because you just don't know what guy's going to show up at the arena that night.
We talked a little bit about this off the air, but I really want to get your opinion because you brought up the Indiana Pacers. Kind of the inexplicable, they're not doing well, but nonetheless, when you look at the last year and kind of how that team was building, you'd be really surprised to see the report that they're, selling off Karis LeVert, Domantas Sabonis, and Miles Turner, essentially their core. And you brought it up earlier, the issues with Sabonis and the staff there. They made a comment about Kevin Pritchard, the GM, made a comment about how they're still trying to develop a star. And Domantas Sabonis was left sitting there in the lurch, I'm sitting right here. What do you want from me? It just seems like
double guy.
And
double guys are walking around, and you're not trying to build around. That's a great point you made.
And more than that, this is I was going to say, this is a guy who I remember coming up. He was like, "I'm not my dad. Don't compare me to my dad. I'm not that kind of player." And yet, 5 years into his career, here he is averaging almost 4 assists a game. And it's like, you told us you were your dad, but you sure as heck are putting up the numbers like him.
Exactly. And you know what? I don't want to say they're not giving him enough respect because he's only been in the league for four years. But certainly, this is a guy you go find pieces to build around. And I think you have a couple of them. LeVert and Turner are legitimate players. I was watching Turner the other night. I had a great seat. I was in the second row across from the visitors bench. So you can really watch guys move without the ball. And he can do a lot of things. But that team is disjointed. Now, Carlisle isn't available because he's in COVID protocol. And it seemed like they play a little bit more relaxed, but they can't find a way to put teams away. But I think that they have enough pieces there to be a very competitive team. Now, the problem is the East is such a, you got 4 or 5 legitimate teams that can compete. Then you've got about 3 teams that are like trying to figure out how do we knock on the door, if not stay around 500. And then you have the ones that are constantly rebuilding. And compared to the West, what do you have? 9, 10 deep. That are teams that are bona fide, legit playoff quality teams. Now, how far they go in the playoffs is a different story, but they're deeper. But when I look at the Pacers, I think they're one of those teams that's trying to figure it out. Where do they fit in this equation? They should be considered a playoff team if they get some people going. They got some talent, but I think Carlisle might be the concern here.
Sticking to the East really quick, have you gotten any kind of feel from the people around the league about, what we're watching right now in Cleveland? Is this a legit jump by a group of young players, or is this kind of a early season, young team, weird year with people being out for COVID and things like that? Or is this a legit developing young core in Cleveland?
It's a good question, especially when you've got Love and a couple other veterans still around. some of those guys, Love knows he's been on winning teams. I think they're making a step. I really do. But your point is a good one because sometimes you can get off to a great start. And Mike Shannon would always say, you better beat these teams now while they don't realize how bad they are, because they're going to get bad at some point.
Yes.
And I always find myself looking at the barometer right around January 15th, Martin Luther King birthday, on when teams start to create a little distance or teams hit the wall and they don't know how to recover. Those are the dates when you can really, it's more telltale on what you really have. Now with COVID and some teams with some injuries, it's going to be even harder to assess that because the continuity really isn't there. And, and now I'm hearing they may shut this thing down for a few days across the board to get everybody in order. And maybe that's not bad for this reason. If you're Cleveland, the one thing you probably need more of is practice. And the way that NBA schedule works, man, you just don't have.
You don't. Yeah. I really don't think casual fans understand how little actual practice time and how oftentimes your entire game plan for a team is literally just on your iPad, and at no point do you actually, beyond a little bit of shoot around, do you actually get to do anything on the court preparing between some of these games. And I think that's why you see people complain about the quality in the regular season as opposed to the postseason. Well, it's a pretty stark reason why, and there's a pretty good reason why we see games like that. And it's because rarely do you get to practice actually between some of these games.
You're doing a lot of coaching on the bench. And I'll give you a good example. I'm thinking about the Warriors' road schedule. Okay, they're in they're in Philly on Saturday, Indianapolis on Monday, New York on Tuesday, off day Wednesday and Thursday, and now they're in Boston tonight. Where are they going to practice? And then they had plane problems coming out of Indianapolis. So they flew in day up the game, which was a whole other storm of sorts. So it's really hard, and this is where the young players have a problem not understanding how to take care of their bodies. You always hear guys in the NBA saying, "Hey, you got to get your rest. You got to stay off your feet. You got to get your rest. You got to eat right." And the way these teams are set up now, as far as the dietitians and the performance people that are involved, they understand that better than anybody. They also have done some sleep studies on when is a good time to travel. Do you go in day up? Do you try and get there day before to get acclimated? There's a lot of things that have gone on, and this goes back about 10 years. Vancouver Canucks in the NHL were the first ones to commission a sleep study because they traveled more than any professional sports team in North America.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There were a lot of interesting things that came out of that, and now the NBA has adapted a lot of those practices. Some baseball teams are starting to look at it. The NFL doesn't care because they fly in a day before and they can care less. And, obviously the NHL has tried to do some things differently. But going back to your original point about Cleveland, I really like what I see in the development of some of their younger players. But I think time will tell. Let's have this conversation, let's say second or third week of January. We'll have a better idea.
Sounds good to me. And let's get to the big topic of the day. You were in the building. You were in Madison Square Garden when Steph Curry pulled up and broke Ray Allen's record. How was it to be in the building for that?
Man, it was electric. Everybody was in. I was in Indy the night before, and it was that was the first sellout they had all year.
Yep.
And one thing, but before I get to that, I want to just talk about Curry. So I got there really early. And he was out there doing his own little shoot around, not the one with the team. Guys just come out, just want to get loose, and then they'll go back in, and then they'll come out and do a team shoot around. But to watch how he prepares and how he trains and his ball handling and his positioning, and, he might be the best conditioned guy in the league, by the way. But to watch his routine is fascinating. But I was even taken more by Matt how when he's on the floor, he's always moving. I mean, he's dipping and dodging, he's weaving, and he's got the one move because, he'll lean into you and give you a shoulder or maybe put his head right in your chest and then bounce off of you. And he sets guys up with that. but he also is a hell of a screen setter. That's one of the reasons why Golden State's really good. All those guys set screens. All those guys understand what you need to do away from the ball. And it's a lost art. And I think it's one of the reasons why Golden State has best record in the league for that reason. Now, as far as the atmosphere, man, it was something. The who's who of the league and entertainment were all there.
Mm-hmm.
And, the key to it was he got off early. He got the two baskets that he needed. And it was like the weight of the world was off of him. And then they went back to playing. I mean, they dismantled the Knicks. I mean, Thibodeau is a really good defensive coach.
Mm-hmm.
Man, those back screens they set, man, and they got guys coming off the corner. It is fascinating to watch. And I'll tell you a guy who I won't say he gets a bad rap, but people kind of give the eye roll because he's a guy who chirps a lot. That Draymond Green, he might be as fundamentally sound as anybody I've seen play the game. I mean, he can guard. He can rebound. He can run the offense. He sets screens. I mean, he gives himself up. He's not a double-double guy. He may have 10 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, but he's always doing something that makes him a really special player. And I'm told that Klay Thompson's not far away. If they get him back, Iceman is on track too. They think that they'll have both those guys back when they come off this road trip.
It's ridiculous. Draymond Green defensively, I think people, we talk about, defensive, signal callers in football and things like that, but I don't think people understand how you can be, that kind of, directing traffic kind of way. And Draymond, I mean, you see him, he points guys off, he tells guys to switch on screens, fly with that guy. I got the paint. He did a great breakdown with Doris Burke where they went through like a collection of his plays, and she had him explain, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And it's just the guy's cerebral mindset to defense. And that take away the fact that he's one of the most deadly passers on the short roll, in recent memory, just the way he's a monster on defense. He doesn't put up the blocks. He doesn't have the gaudy steal numbers all the time, but there's no doubt in my mind that, it's not some weird, stat thing that the Warriors are the best defense in the league. That's a legitimate thing because Draymond Green is one of the best, if not the best defensive player in the league right now. And I love so much that you brought up Curry off the ball because, first of all, the little things that he does that get lost in the game. He'll sprint really hard and catch 3 or 4, 3-point shots off a screen, and then he'll run a play where he sprints through a screen, but then he sprints into setting a screen because the defense reacts like he's about to take a shot. And the way it morphs around him, it's just you don't have a chance against that Warriors offense when he's on. And that's the thing is people want to highlight him for his 3-point shooting, but you pointed out his stamina, his ability to contort defenses when he doesn't have the ball in his hand. I don't care if it's 1965, 1985, or 2005. That's an ability that's basketball. That's fundamentals at its absolute core of the game right there.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I'll tell you something. When I watch him, I think he's been the most dynamic difference maker for the game of basketball than any player since Michael. And I know he's got the lofty numbers, but here's the thing. There are more kids that can relate to Steph Curry and all the things you mentioned. He's an exceptionally fundamentally sound player. And because there's more kids that'll end up being 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", than being 6'8" or 6'9", weighing 260 pounds.
And able to run a 4.40.
Yeah, and the fact that he's made it be it's okay to shoot the 3. I remember there was a time where the 3-point shot wasn't encouraged. More coaches thought you could lose by shooting the 3 than win with the 3. Well, he's changed that dynamic. And now we've got young kids jacking it up. But here's where Curry separates himself from the rest of the world. He's as good of a passer as you'll see. Oh, and just like you mentioned, he gets everybody to come to him. He always finds the open man. He's not just trigger happy. Unlike Allen Wiggins, who I never saw. That guy guy never saw a shot he didn't like, man.
I love Draymond after the game pointing out to all the reporters. He goes, "We run that play a lot, and if the ball ever gets an Andrew Wiggins during that play, he shoots it every single time." And
Now,
he was hunting for the record.
Hey, listen.
He was. That's all he looks for.
Yeah.
He made a couple good passes, but man, this guy shoot first, shoot second, shoot third, look around. Maybe I'm gonna shoot fourth. I mean, he is a four-person option, man. I mean, he will do everything. Well, here's the other thing about him. He's a sneaky rebounder because he's got exception. He's got the longest arms I've ever seen.
And I think he's finally become the defender that we all expected him to, and that's been the big revelation where it's like, fine, you can't shoot. We saw that at Kansas. Maybe your shot's broken. You can't. You're not the most disciplined offensive player, but if you at 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan can just have that effort on defense, you can change teams, and that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah,
he is remade himself. I always thought because he was a one and done guy, he was. I know he was picked high in the draft, but he wasn't ready. And then, the problem with these guys who are one and done, they're normally drafted by a bad team, so they can't grow. And I think he was a classic example. Minnesota was the worst place for him to go. Now he's in a different environment, and that's why I'm anxious to see Wiseman when he comes back. Because I'm going to tell you something. The most vicious, nastiest two-man game this league has seen, if Wiseman can get on the same page with Draymond, it's a wrap, man. The only thing Wiseman's going to have to do is go strong the hole and work on his free throw shooting because he's going to be at the line a lot.
That'll be absolutely destructive. And I kept you way too long, but really quickly, I do want to say, and I think you'll agree with me here. You mentioned Minnesota. Get Anthony Edwards to any other team in the league because he is a treasure. He's going to be a blast to watch for the next decade plus, and get him out of Minnesota before it ruins him.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see what Minnesota's next step is going to be because the sale I think was consummated recently. And I'm anxious to see what they're going to do from a hierarchy standpoint and really make a commitment to these players. I think Karl Anthony Towns, I love him. I think he's probably one of those guys that probably wants to change the scenery because he keeps seeing the same old stuff coming through there. And every time there's a good player, they end up putting him in a package and they move him. I wouldn't be surprised to see him done at the trade deadline. But I also think at some point they got to make a commitment. And that's what a lot of these teams just don't know how to do. But Minnesota's got some interesting pieces to their puzzle. But, who knows where they're going to take this thing. They're one of those teams that's on the outside looking in. Remember, I was talking like in the West, you had 10 teams that were playoff legit. Minnesota's not part of that yet, but they've got some pieces that would make them playoff legit if they can maybe sign a legitimate free agent, maybe get a player in a trade without giving up some real valuable assets that can really help them, a veteran. But they're not that far away from competing if they can get themselves squared away internally from an organizational standpoint.
Last thing before we let you go, we always go through a little bit of the NBA schedule coming up, especially over the weekend. Let me know if any of these games are really catching your eye that you're going to be watching this weekend. So before SLU and Auburn play at 8 p.m. tomorrow, you'll have Golden State and the Raptors. You'll have Cavs and Bucks later that night. You can catch probably the fourth quarter after the Bills finish up. Blazers and Grizzlies, Nikola Jokic versus the Nets, and that's an accurate way to describe that game. And the Hornets versus the Suns. What are you watching this weekend?
I'm probably
watching Brooklyn and Denver. I think two teams that don't see each other, they play each other twice a year. But my concern now is, Matt, who's healthy, who's in protocol. I mean, we're almost to the point where some teams are going to find some guys who are in some good pickup leagues. I mean, the G League is helping out here in a lot of cases, but even the G League's getting chewed up with COVID as well. So I don't know where they're going to get this next batch of teams from. And I think if you're a handicap, if you're a bettor, it's hard to put a line now down because you don't know who's playing. And when you look at what Brooklyn did the other night, they had 8 guys. Can you imagine if they had a back-to-back or were playing 3 out of the next 4? You know,
I mean,
I think that there's so many things that we have to be careful of here down the stretch. I know there was a lot of talk today and last night about the league maybe putting this thing on pause. I know they met again today to figure out what the next step is going to be, but I think here's what you're going to see. If you hit a certain number, if there's a certain number of players that go down, then they may shut it down. The only thing that's going to save them is they got to have somebody on the floor for Christmas Day. That's their biggest day of the regular season. And they got to have the legit players that we all know about on the floor on Christmas Day with those 4 games that they're going to run. Is it 4 or 5?
I think it's 4.
Christmas Day. 4 games.
Yeah, I think it's 4.
So this is what you got. You got to make sure you got enough good players available. So I think the next 24 hours is going to really decide a lot of things on how this league is going to look come next weekend.
There it is. It's a good slate. Like you said, a lot to watch here in the next 24 hours, both good in basketball and also maybe a little nerve-wracking. But thank you so much for your time today, Claibs. Thank you so much for helping make the two-man game happen here on Claibs Online. Before we get out of here, tell everybody a little bit about what's going to be coming up on Claibs Online over the next week.
Well, you know what?
We're going to probably, because of the holidays, we'll kind of focus on college football as the bowl season's underway. We'll huddle up with Howard Richards later this week. We're going to visit, hopefully, with a couple of people hockey-wise, as we're going to get into that mode here fairly soon, where the moratorium comes up, I believe, on the 23rd, where players can't be moved during the holidays. So we'll talk about that a little bit with Alex Ferrario on Monday. We want to get through this weekend and see what the Blues look like. So we'll have a lot of hockey and a lot of college football to talk about over the next few days.
All right, this has been the two-man game with Rammer and Rocc. Big thanks to Bob Ramsey. Big thanks to Mike Claiborne for joining us today talking about some NBA. We will be back on Tuesday afternoon talking some more SLU basketball and NBA. Thank you so